A teenager with a screwdriver and a USB cable should not be able to turn a modern car into stolen property in less than a minute. Not a car built by one of the largest automakers on earth. Not a brand that spent 30 years crawling out of the cheap car basement, fighting for respect, winning awards, and telling America it had finally changed. But that is exactly what happened to Hyundai. A company that went from being a punchline in the 1980s and 1990s to becoming part of the third largest automotive group on the planet, suddenly found itself at the center of a nationwide crime wave. A wave so large that owners sued, cities sued, attorneys general sued, insurers backed away, and Hyundai and Kia were pushed into settlements worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And the part that makes it almost unbelievable is how small the original shortcut was. A basic engine immobilizer. A tiny anti-theft device that most of the industry had already made standard. One simple part that prevents a thief from starting the car without the right key. Hyundai left it out of millions of vehicles, and years later, TikTok exposed the decision to the entire country. That is the catastrophe hiding inside Hyundai's comeback story, because this is not just a story about stolen cars. It is a story about what happens when a company climbs from the bottom to the top by moving fast, controlling cost, and promising more for less, then discovers that the corners it cut on the way up are waiting for it at the summit. For decades, Hyundai's rise looked almost impossible. In the early days, the brand was not feared by Toyota, Volkswagen, Ford, or General Motors. It was mocked. The cars were cheap, and people knew they were cheap. The Hyundai Excel became a symbol of bargain basement transportation, the kind of car people bought when they had no better option, the kind of car late-night jokes were built around. Hyundai had a reputation problem so deep that quality alone would not fix it overnight. So in 1999, the company made a move that sounded reckless at the time. It offered a 10-year, 100,000-mile warranty, roughly double what many rivals were willing to put on the table. That was not just marketing. That was Hyundai looking at skeptical buyers and saying, "You do not trust us, so we will carry the risk ourselves." Slowly, the joke started to fade. The cars improved. Then they became good. Then they became genuinely competitive. Hyundai poured money into design, hired serious engineering talent, strengthened Kia, and launched Genesis as a luxury brand willing to look BMW and Mercedes in the eye. By the 2020s, Hyundai Motor Group had done the unthinkable. It had passed Ford, it had passed General Motors. It had become the third largest automaker in the world, behind only Toyota and Volkswagen. In America, the momentum looked even stronger. Hyundai and Kia SUVs were stylish, well-priced, and everywhere. Genesis was getting attention from luxury buyers. The Ioniq 5 was collecting global awards and being compared favorably with Tesla. Hyundai was building a $7.5 billion electric vehicle plant in Georgia, promising thousands of American jobs. It bought Boston Dynamics and pushed into robotics. The old punchline had become a technological powerhouse. The comeback was real, but that is what makes the disaster so damaging. Hyundai did not fall because it never learned how to build great cars. It fell into crisis because some of its biggest problems came from the same discipline that helped it rise. Relentless cost control, and no decision exposed that more brutally than the missing immobilizer. By the 2010s, engine immobilizers were ordinary. They were not exotic luxury technology. They were the kind of thing most buyers never thought about because they assumed every modern car already had one. According to one report, by 2015, 96% of cars sold by other manufacturers included immobilizers. At Hyundai and Kia, the figure was only 26%. That gap was not random. It meant millions of vehicles were sold without a basic device that stops simple theft. For years, the weakness sat quietly inside the cars. Then, in 2022, it became internet content. Videos spread on TikTok showing how easy certain Hyundai and Kia models were to steal. Pop open part of the steering column, use a USB cable in the ignition, and the car could be gone in under a minute. No master criminal, no sophisticated equipment. Just a viral tutorial and a design choice that should never have been there. The thieves called themselves the Kia Boys, and what began as a social media trend turned into a public safety emergency. The numbers did not rise gently. In some cities, thefts reportedly jumped tenfold. Hyundai and Kia models became some of the most stolen vehicles in America, with 4 of the 10 most stolen vehicles in the country in 2025 coming from the two brands. Neighborhoods saw joyrides, crashes, stripped cars, abandoned cars, and families waking up to empty driveways. These were not just property crimes on a spreadsheet. The thefts were tied to real injuries, real crashes, and multiple deaths. Police departments were overwhelmed. Cities argued that Hyundai and Kia had effectively dumped the cost of their decision onto the public. And owners were caught in the middle, discovering that a car they bought in good faith had become a target because of something they never knew was missing. Imagine buying a car, paying the loan, paying the registration, doing everything right, and then finding out your insurance company may not want to cover it because thieves have learned that your vehicle is easy to take. That is not a minor quality issue. That is a breach of trust. And once the lawsuit started, the bill came from every direction. There was a $200 million settlement, then a $145 million settlement aimed at people whose vehicles had been stolen, then a multi-state deal involving 35 attorneys general. Add the settlements, the legal pressure, the reputational damage, and the cost of anti-theft fixes for more than 7 million vehicles in America, and the missing immobilizer becomes one of the most expensive corners any automaker has cut this decade. The cruel irony is obvious. Hyundai built its American comeback on a warranty that said, "Trust us, we will stand behind the car." Then it spent hundreds of millions dealing with a crisis that a cheap part could have helped prevent. Different decade, different Hyundai, same question. Was this company over-delivering, or was it just better at hiding the places where it underbuilt? And before Hyundai could fully escape the theft crisis, another problem started hitting the very cars that were supposed to define its future. The Ioniq 5 was not supposed to be part of the old Hyundai story. It was supposed to be proof that Hyundai could beat legacy automakers and challenge Tesla at the same time. It looked futuristic. It charged fast. It won awards. It helped make Hyundai's electric strategy feel credible. But beneath the praise sat a component called the ICCU, the Integrated Charging Control Unit. In simple terms, this unit helps manage power between the large drive battery and the smaller 12-volt system that runs critical functions inside the car. When it works, drivers never think about it. When it fails, everything changes. Owners reported warning lights, drained 12-volt batteries, and in serious cases, sudden loss of drive power while driving. That means a vehicle promoted as the future of Hyundai mobility could become a powerless 2-ton object in traffic or at highway speed. For an automaker selling technology, safety, and reliability in one package, that is the nightmare. Hyundai issued a recall in March 2024 covering around 147,000 vehicles. Then the problem did not disappear. In November, the recall expanded, pushing the total past 200,000 vehicles across Hyundai, Kia, and Genesis electric models including the Ioniq 5, Ioniq 6, Kia EV6, and several Genesis EVs. A recall can happen to any automaker. What matters is whether the fix actually fixes the vehicle. And that is where the ICCU issue became much more serious. In April 2026, a federal class action lawsuit alleged that replacement parts installed during recall repairs were themselves defective. Owners claimed that even after bringing vehicles in for the repair, the same kind of failure could return. That accusation strikes at the heart of Hyundai's credibility, because a bad part is one problem, a bad fix is another. A bad fix for a safety-related power loss issue in a flagship EV is the kind of thing that makes buyers ask whether the company understands the problem or is simply trying to contain it. Hyundai extended ICCU warranty coverage to 15 years and 180,000 miles, which sounds generous until you hear the message underneath it. Companies do not extend coverage that far on a component they think is harmless. They do it when the risk is large, expensive, and likely to keep coming back. In 1999, a long warranty felt like confidence. In this case, it feels more like damage control. And that brings Hyundai to the most uncomfortable pattern in the whole story. The missing immobilizer was not the only problem critics say was treated after the damage spread. The ICCU was not the only case where the fix itself came under attack. Hyundai has already spent years fighting a much older defect story, one that involved engines, failures, and fire. For more than a decade, Hyundai and Kia have been tied to major engine problems involving engine families such as Theta 2. The allegation was not cosmetic, and it was not small. These engines could suffer connecting rod bearing failure, which in plain language means internal parts can wear or fail so severely that the engine begins destroying itself from the inside. In some cases, that kind of failure was linked to stalling. In other cases, fire. Millions of vehicles were recalled over the years, and lawsuits alleged Hyundai knew about defects before warning the public. The company's major response included software designed to detect abnormal knocking, warn the driver, and put the vehicle into a protective mode before catastrophic failure. But critics have argued for years that this does not cure the underlying mechanical weakness. It listens for the engine dying. It does not stop the disease that makes it die. That criticism should sound familiar by now. With the immobilizer, Hyundai responded after the theft wave exploded. With the ICCU, owners alleged the recall repair still left them vulnerable to the same failure. With the engine cases, critics argued the software detected symptoms rather than eliminating the root cause. Different systems, different vehicles, different years, same basic storyline. A cost-sensitive company ships millions of cars. A defect or omission turns into a widespread crisis, and the remedy becomes its own controversy. That does not mean every Hyundai is bad. It does not erase the genuine engineering wins, the design improvements, or the millions of owners who love their cars. But it does challenge the mythology. For years, Hyundai was presented as the disciplined genius of the auto world, the company that could give you sharper design, more features, longer warranties, and lower prices all at once. The question now is what had to be squeezed to make that equation work. Because every automaker lives under cost pressure. Every car is a collection of compromises. But when the compromise is a missing anti-theft chip, a failing charging controller, or an engine protection strategy that critics say detects disaster instead of preventing it, the savings stop looking clever. They start looking dangerous. And this internal pressure arrived just as outside pressure started closing in. Hyundai's fifth crisis is not a defective part. It is the business environment around the company tightening like a vice. The United States is Hyundai's most important market, producing around 40% of its revenue, and roughly 40% of the vehicles Hyundai sells here have been imported. So when the United States placed a 25% tariff on imported vehicles in 2025, later negotiated down to 15%, Hyundai took the hit directly in the place it could least afford it. Tariffs alone wiped out around $1.3 billion in profit in a single quarter. $1.3 billion gone in 90 days, not because Hyundai stopped selling cars, but because the cost of selling them changed overnight. For the full year 2025, Hyundai's net profit fell 22%. In the fourth quarter, net profit dropped more than 50%. That is the brutal part. This was not a company with empty showrooms and unwanted products. Hyundai was still moving metal, still posting strong revenue, still proving that buyers wanted the cars. But revenue is not the same thing as profit. Selling more vehicles does not save you if the margin gets crushed on the way through. And while tariffs were hammering Hyundai in America, China had already become a warning sign. Hyundai was once far more relevant there, but Chinese brands like BYD and Xpeng have changed the game with fast development cycles, advanced software, aggressive pricing, and electric vehicles built for local buyers. Now those same Chinese competitors are not staying inside China. They are pushing into Europe, Southeast Asia, and other markets Hyundai needs for growth. So Hyundai has to fight on two fronts at once. Build more inside America to avoid tariff exposure, while defending global markets from Chinese rivals that can move faster and price harder. That is why Hyundai is pouring $21 billion into expanding American manufacturing, with a goal of making 80% of the vehicles it sells in the United States on American soil by 2030. Strategically, it makes sense. Financially, it is enormous. Operationally, it is risky. And symbolically, it already came with a black eye. In 2025, immigration agents raided Hyundai's new battery plant project in Georgia, detaining hundreds of workers, many described as Korean specialists involved in setting up the technology. The same American manufacturing push that was supposed to protect Hyundai from tariffs became a reminder that global supply chains do not become simple just because a company builds on U.S. soil. The Georgia plant was supposed to be Hyundai's answer. Instead, for a moment, it became another headline in the pile. That is why this moment matters. Hyundai is not facing one crisis. It is facing convergence. Theft settlements from older vehicles, EV power loss allegations in newer vehicles, engine defect litigation that refuses to disappear, tariffs crushing profit in the company's most important market, Chinese competition attacking the future growth map. Any one of those would be manageable for a company of Hyundai's size. All of them together change the story. The feel-good comeback narrative is over, at least for now. The company that once asked America to trust it with a 10-year warranty is now asking owners, regulators, courts, and investors to believe that each new problem is separate, contained, and fixable. Maybe Hyundai can prove that. It is still massive. It still builds impressive cars. It still has engineering depth, global scale, and brands that buyers care about. But the burden of proof has shifted. The public no longer just sees the bargain brand that became brilliant. It sees a company trying to explain why the same kind of problem keeps appearing in different forms. The missing chip, the failing power unit, the engine warning software, the recall that allegedly does not end the failure, the profit hit that arrives just when the legal and repair bills are piling up. That is the sudden catastrophe that caught Hyundai off guard. Not one explosion, but every old decision, every unresolved defect, and every outside pressure arriving at the same time. And in the car business, that is how reckoning usually works, not as one dramatic collapse, as a bill that gets delivered in pieces until the total becomes impossible to ignore. Hyundai climbed higher than almost anyone thought possible. It turned ridicule into respect, cheap cars into award winners, and a damaged name into a global empire. But no comeback is permanent just because it was impressive. The corners cut on the way up do not vanish. They wait inside the products, inside the lawsuits, inside the recalls, inside the balance sheet. And eventually, when the company reaches the top, those corners come looking for payment. So the question now is simple. Is Hyundai strong enough to engineer its way out again? Or are we watching the first real crack in one of the greatest automotive comeback stories ever told? If you own a Hyundai or Kia, and you have dealt with theft, recalls, dead batteries, engine problems, or an EV that suddenly lost power, drop your experience in the comments, because the next chapter of this story may come from the people driving these cars every day.